Good morning, dear friends, and welcome. Thank you for joining us as we resume studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. We had a little bit of
Rabbi,
a break.
resume with a Z.
Resume. We're back on Zoom after a long break. And for Mark, it's been probably even more agonizing because yesterday was already not Chag and you couldn't go on Zoom. And so I want to thank you all for your patience. It's good to be back. My voice, you may hear, is a Simchas Torah voice, but I have a lot to be thankful for. I can still use it. We're studying the entire Talmud. Today is Chaf Dalid Tishrei, the 24th of Tishrei, Isru Chag. And what's today's date? I'm totally
19th.
The 19th. All right, you see, I'm totally after all the Chagim, I'm only on the Jewish date. All right, it's the 19th. It's a Wednesday. Yeah, it's a Wednesday. Feels like a Sunday. It's a Wednesday, and we are studying the Talmud, and we're picking up where we left off, a discussion about circumcision. Before we hit record, Reb Beryl commented about how we thought about the professor's comment that was about atonement after Yom Kippur, and what's the meaning of the Slach Lano Avinu Ki Chatanu, and Reb Beryl referenced the fact that there is a sense of communal atonement, even if even if the person who's saying the prayer has no flaws, but they're saying Slach Lanu Avinu Ki Chatanu, we collectively have sinned, and we discussed this. Of course, it leaves us with a little bit of discomfort, the idea of one person confessing for another person's sin. And I'll even remind you that we said that maybe not that the person saying the confession is trying to atone for the other person's sin, but there is a sense of, sound is working. There's a sense of communal responsibility. And so if your friend is still struggling, well, then that's your problem. And so maybe that's the Slach Lanu Avinu Ki Chatanu. If one member of the community is struggling, there is a collective responsibility and a collective obligation to take care of that. And so that, I think, can work well. Oh, so I saw that on Simchas Torah, the town's Apikores came to Shul, and he's dancing with the Torahs, dancing and dancing. And the Rav asked him, Reb Yid, I love you as I love every fellow Jew, but Simchas Torah celebrates concluding the reading of the Torah. So what do you have to do with this celebration? Why are you so b'simcha? So the town's Apikor says, what do you mean? I know in prayers and on Yom Kippur you said vidoy, and you were atoning al chatanu, and you were really thinking about me and all of my sins. Well, now that you thought about that you were all sad in Shul on Yom Kippur because of my sins, I'm able to be happy in Shul on Yom Kippur. I mean on Simchas Torah because of your Torah effort and your celebration. So maybe there's a collective, and it's actually the truth. Of course, every Jew can celebrate Simchas Torah regardless of their Torah knowledge. But anyway, so it works better in Hebrew and maybe when it's told by a comedian, but there you have it. All right, let's just mic sound check. Everything's good. The sound is working. All right, so let's.
Oh, good. A little bit of a background.
So hold on. We'll hit mute all, and I'll make sure I'm on the right microphone, which I think I am. Yeah, I am. We'll just hit mute just for the start. Of course, reminder that what makes this not a shir, but a chabura is the fact that every member has a voice. And so I just hit mute all just for the introduction. Please unmute for all comments and questions. So we were talking about bris on Shabbos and the many ways that that Shabbos and bris need to be mediated. There are malachos, works that are not seemingly Shabbosdik, that occur with the bris, some that are permitted, some that are not, and some that are the subject of a debate. We actually closed off last Wednesday, which was the first day of Chol HaMoed. We were talking about, who remembers? Let me see if I can remember. We were talking about a somewhat awkward, at least for me it was a little awkward, a somewhat awkward comparison of the viability Well, let me back up. We asked the question, how is it that we do a bris for a baby on the 8th day on Shabbos? What happens if, God forbid, the baby does not survive the 30 days? As we know, there's a certain sense of insecurity. There's a certain sense of angst about a baby, especially the first 30 days. And in the eyes of halacha, if a baby passes within the 30 days, the category that we're going to apply is neufel, which inartfully or awkwardly translates as stillborn, but it's a description of a baby who was born but is not a viable baby, which is a halachic concept. And so if the baby has a bris and the baby is not really viable, well, then retroactively that's a chil Shabbos. You gave a bris to a baby who didn't need to have a bris. And so the Gemara made a comparison which was uncomfortable, that if the baby doesn't survive, so then it was never really the bris. It was cutting, the words of the Gemara, again, are hard for me to say, but it was like he was cutting flesh that's not alive, and that's not a problem on Shabbos. And so from there, we went into a broader conversation about the status of a neufel, a baby who does not survive, or the prospect of a baby not surviving, and comparing it to the laws of viability of livestock. Not because we're comparing a human to an animal in the emotional sense, or even in the spiritual sense, but in the medical sense. Because here the Gemara is considering a biological reality of the prospect of the survival of a recently born living being. And there is some comparison, there is some similarity in the Talmud science, let's call it, or the halachic understanding of the viability of a being that is born. And so that led us to talk about the difference between a nevela, which is an animal that does not survive, an animal that just dies, the corpse of an animal that just died, a treifa, which is a living animal, but has a mortal injury that's going to cause the animal not to live out 1 year, and the shechita of a treifa, if there's any halachic contribution to shechting an animal that's not viable. And the Gemara pointed out that if you shecht an animal that is not viable, it's a treifa, it is not kosher, but it is considered not ritually impure as a nevela.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a problem of what I think is happening here in general. You do a mitzvah, a bris, whatever, and then something happens after the fact. But at the time you did it, you did it with whole heart, etc. So you're going to go back retroactively.
No. That ultimately is the determination of the Gemara. Ultimately, the Gemara determines that you do it. The Gemara was having a theoretical question about if there might be some kind of very big challenge. I think the easier answer, which I don't know why the Gemara didn't give it, I suspect, maybe I've seen it even in the Tosfos, which is if the Torah says you give a bris on the 8th day, that resolves all the other questions. But that's not the angle the Gemara takes. The Gemara takes a little bit of an angle trying to probe and understand the halachic status of a being that is alive, but ultimately does not live out the fullness of, doesn't live and passes in this period of time where there's still a specific angst on the viability of that baby. But just bringing it back to the center, I know it's a long introduction. So we're talking about a treifa and a nevela, and the halacha of slaughter, shechting a nevela, which led us to the question of shechting an animal that's not fully viable from birth. And that was the discussion the Gemara asked, attempting to understand how we look at a born being who doesn't survive into childhood, passes away still in that initial phase of uncertainty. And so the Gemara closed out, and again, this is just to refresh our memory a little bit. The Gemara closed out saying that there is an important distinction between an animal that was once viable and then it has an illness. If you shecht it, it's considered alive, versus a creature, we're talking again about animals, who was born with really not with a viability to survive past a few days, and therefore shechita of that animal may not contribute anything at all. So that was the discussion. That was the discussion that our Gemara had on a week ago. I don't want to really rehash it beyond the fact that the Gemara is going to continue discussing it, but so therefore I wanted to just remind you of the general ideas. Let's share the screen and then we can talk a little more. Nope. Sorry. Well, meanwhile, while we load, okay, here. Talmud Shabbos. We are on one. I didn't even say that we're studying Masechah Shabbos, Parak Tisha also, the 19th chapter, Kuf Lamed Vav 136. Let me find where we're up to, and then we will. Ibayilahu. So the Gemara, let me just find, we're referencing a machlokes that was mentioned a week ago. So let me see if I can find it for you. Bear with me just a moment. All right, so we have to go back to Kuf Lamed Hey Amid Beis. Bear with me a moment. Here is a brisa. Let's take a look. For now, I want to explore it in a vacuum, in isolation of the broader conversation. Here, Rabban Shimon Gamliel Omer. Kol sheshah shloshim yom. If someone lives 30 days, Adam, we're talking about human beings, Einoi Nefel, it is no longer halachically considered what we're translating as a stillborn, a Nefel. Shmonas Yamim bebehema. When it comes to an animal, 8 days, Einoi Nefel is considered a viable baby. Then we have comments. Hold on, let me just go back to our Gemara now. All right, Ibaylahu. Ibaylahu. Pligi Rabbanon Alei Rabban Shimon Gamliel Eloi. Is there a machlokes? I guess we have to go back again and take a look. What did the Chachamim say? The Chachamim said, here, I'm sorry, 1 second. Here. Chiyamos min habehema asher hi lachem la'achla. If an animal dies that is kosher, we were talking there about the status of ritual purity. Lahavi ben shmoina she'ein shchitasei mitarasei. The Chachamim say that if you shecht a young, less than 8-day-old animal, that shchita does nothing. The animal stays ritually impure because it hasn't been proven to be viable yet. So the question is, now back to our Gemara. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that an animal is presumed to be viable after 8 days if it survives. The Chachamim say it's like nothing. Are they arguing or are they agreeing? Do the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says that an animal that survives after 8 days is presumed to be alive or not? And then the question is, if they argue halacha k'moisai, ein halacha k'moisai. So the Gemara wants to bear down to figure out if there is a consensus. Do we all agree with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel that after 8 days the animal is considered viable or not? So it's hard to see this in isolation, but let's understand this as a simple halachic question. Again, the Mishri Vlad shel behema b'toich ches yamin. Is the animal considered viable or not? Tashima. So let's probe the case law and see if there is a consensus about the status of an animal that is beyond 8 days. Do we accept Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's opinion or not? Tashima. Egel. Shenoilad b'yomtiv. The calf is born on Yontif. Shoichat and Oisa b'yontif. The animal that's born on Yontif may be slaughtered on Yontif. what's the point over here? A lot of questions arise, but hold on. What's the point over here? That the point of this text was not to weigh in about the slaughtering of a young animal. The question here is about muktzah, right? Mark, you've shared with us before. We talk about a beitza shenolda b'yantif. An egg is born on yantif.
Right.
It's considered muktzah. Why?
Right. Because it was nolad.
Oh, so usually
an
egel that's nolad would also be muktzah. So Rashi points out ve'enoi muktzah. Sharei bein hashmasha isnami hayamuchan agav imai. Because in the scenario of a baby calf that's born on Yontif, it was really already in the universe of the person that consumes it, because they could have shechted the mother. And then, as we know, the halacha is if you shecht a mother animal and there is a calf in utero, that animal is also permissible, which actually leads to a very, very fascinating side conversation. Dr. Hammer, you're smiling. I wonder if this is what you're thinking about. There's such a thing as an animal, I think it's called the ben pikua. An animal that is born, that is in utero, doesn't need its own shechita. And in a scenario where the animal is viable, it still doesn't need shechita, which is a very interesting situation, an interesting scenario. You know where it's brought up agadically? It's brought up in the story of Yosef and his brothers. They say that Yosef was complaining to his father about his brothers doing terrible, egregious sins. And one of the terrible, egregious sins he witnessed and reported to his father is that they were eating unslaughtered animals, which was a problem in the Abrahamic faith and was certainly a problem in Jacob's family. And Rashi quotes the Medrash that says that actually the animals they ate were permissible with a unique loophole where they were calves born in utero and therefore they did not need shechita. Dr. Hammer, is that what you were thinking about, or you were thinking of something else?
Something pretty dark, but I'll ask the question anyway because it's related to Yisker and all of this other stuff. If a baby dies in the first 30 days,
what is the memorial?
What in terms of Shiva, Yiska, and all of those issues?
So I don't want to give a full answer because I'm afraid I want to check up in a source, but there are differences. There are distinctions to a baby that passes loyal lenu less than 30 days and more than 30 days. The differences I think are more in the ritual of the nature of the funeral and other traditions. I believe there is Shiva, but you know what? I have to double check. Loyal lenu, we should know these things. Unfortunately, it's certainly not. There are certainly scenarios where if a baby passes and it's deemed to have not been viable, then there would not, or there might not be a shiva. I don't have the whole sugya fresh in front of me, so I want.
My intuition is that there are two classes of babies that could die before 30 days. One class of babies that was born after the full period, and this is a normal baby with all procedures that are due to a normal person who dies at any age. And another class of babies who were born after 8 months that are already considered not viable. And when this baby dies, it only confirms the initial diagnosis.
And a contemporary application would be
answers.
Yeah, Professor. That is certainly an important part of the equation. And in the contemporary application, we don't really say 6 months, 8 months, but a baby that's born, unfortunately, prematurely or with a severe condition versus a baby that is apparently born healthy. There is certainly something to be said about that.
Well, I'm talking about the Talmudic times, because today we don't have such a concept of as a not viable baby. Every baby is viable. So it's only this distinction of Gestalt period applies only to Talmudic times.
Yes. Hold on. Actually, no, I'm looking in the wrong place. I'm sorry. Hold on.
I don't want to delay now, but Professor, remind me about what you said, and I'll tell you a controversy going on in Quebec right now.
All right, let's see. We might have to. Maybe we'll come to this at the end, but it's an interesting question, doctor, and it also deserves treatment. But for now, we'll come back here. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says an animal until 8 days is not viable. It shouldn't be shechted or anything. Here we have a text saying that you can shecht the animal on Yontif at day 1. Professor, the Gemara is already, by the way, going to allude to your line of thinking, and I think we could even bring it as a proof that this is going to be a type of consideration. What are we talking about here where you're allowed to slaughter the animal right away? Which again, I know it's an awkward analog, meaning that the born being is presumed 1,000,000% viable from the day of birth. The kimlei begave shekol loy chadashav. Here we're talking about an animal that we are absolutely certain is not a preemie. We're absolutely certain that it was born to term. And therefore, from this perspective, with this answer, the whole question of a baby that's going through a kind of wait and see period would only be, according to this take, if the animal was possibly premature or the individual was born prematurely. And again, consistent, as the professor pointed out, the analog of a human being. So, based on this brisa, we have an apparent contradiction, machlokes. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says you cannot shecht an animal till 8 days, which is when it is no longer not viable. A brisa says that you can shecht an animal even on the same day, and in order to mediate and to show that it's not necessarily a conflict, we say no. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is talking about where we don't know exactly if the baby's viable, so it takes 8 days to prove that this is a strong, healthy baby calf, let's say. But if the baby is born and it's robust, and maybe we're talking about that it's born on a farm where the farmer was very, very meticulous to note exactly, or maybe they're very proactive in the mating, which exists on farms, and so they knew with absolute certainty. And also, I think in some farming settings, they separate the males and females, so we know exactly when conception would have occurred. And also, I think they can tell when the animal is no longer in heat that the animal has actually there has been a conception, and so maybe that's the difference. And therefore, we do not know if there's a machlokes or a consensus between Rabbi and Shimon Gamliel, who says you wait 8 days, and the Chachamim, which leads us to need to continue this discussion. Now, this Gemara in of itself is very enlightening because it indicates to us that, because if you just in passing, if you remember earlier on, we said that there are 2 separate issues. There's the issue of premature, and then there's the issue of a neifel, which is 2 separate things. But from the Gemara's understanding here, it is very much intertwined. So I don't want to unwind that whole discussion, but this is we get a sense of the Gemara's perspective. Tashema, let's try again. Let's take another stab at understanding if everyone agrees with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel or if there is a machlokes. Vishavin, and we'll look at Rabbi Steinsaltz in a moment and see the full text. Shem noilatu umuma imai shezamin hamuchan. Let's read. Okay, coming here. Another proof. We just read this, but it was a week ago. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon disagree with regards to whether or not it is permitted to inspect a firstborn animal for blemishes on a festival. The Chor has a special status, and it's kadosh. I'm sorry, this is not from our Gemara, I don't think. A bechor that is born, so it's kodesh, it goes to the Beis Hamikdash, it's a carbon, but first it needs to be inspected. If it has a mum, it is not kodesh, and I believe, and we'll see in Rashi in a moment, that it can be treated like any other animal, but if it doesn't have a mum, then it is a carbon, and it's off limits. And before what's quoted, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, the machlokes about inspecting the animal to see if it is blemished or not on Yom Tov. But they agree, Shem noilad hu umumay imoy. If the animal is born And I guess I think we mean the blemish is very visible. Or it was born with a blemish. Shezem min hamuchan, it is considered an animal that is not muksa. Same idea as the previous text, in a different context, the context of muksa, but the bottom line is, if it's born with a mum, it means it was never off limits. It was always available for private consumption. And here we see that you could shecht an animal even on day one. Unlike Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says you got to wait till day 8. So the Gemara answers, Hachanami will give the exact same answer. The distinction is the animal is clearly not premature. The animal is clearly viable. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was only talking about a scenario where the viability was not entirely evident. Well, 1 second. All right. Rashi V'Shavin. I'm sorry. Professor? Someone said something?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
No, I'm not talking.
Oh, okay. You see, still after Simchas Torah, I'm still hearing things. But with a few sessions of therapy, I should be back to normal. Here, let's read Rashi. V'Shavin. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, shenechleku b'royin mumim b'yantiv. There's machlokes if we inspect animals for mum and yantiv. If the animal is born with a mum, if you discover a mum, you're changing the status of the animal, or you're making the animal available for consumption. So here, it was evident from the moment of birth. Excuse me. All right, third text. Hashema. Now we're going to figure this out once and for all. To Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda quoted Shmuel saying, in regards to the question of animals being viable or not, Halacha Kirabban Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha follows the perspective of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. That what? You got to wait 8 days. Halacha. The word halacha in this context indicates, what does halacha mean? The practice follows this way. Mechlal de pligi. That language, we infer that there is a debate. And the Gemara says, indeed, shmami, no, we can infer that there is a machlokes. There are chachamim, there are rabbis who say that the animal is viable immediately. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says you got to wait 8 days. And indeed, the halachic matter is we wait till the 8th day. I think retroactively, hold on. I'm gonna withhold commentary because the Gemara is going to continue with important analysis. So, but let's just take a fast look in this is not in the Shulchan Aruch HaShulchan. Okay, all I'm going to tell you without going into it is that it seems like without an in-depth study, there is a sense of a little bit of a mishmash of understanding what the 8-day waiting period is. And I'm just going to give you the comment that I didn't say, and then I'm going to say it, but with the fact that it may be overthrown and undone again. The Gemara brought texts that seem to indicate that you could shecht an animal on day one. And we wanted to say that it might work for Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and the Chachamim. And so we said maybe there's a difference if the animal is super healthy or the animal was born prematurely, which seemed to run counter to earlier perspectives of the Gemara. When the Gemara here resolves and says that there is indeed a machlokes, we might have the opportunity to totally forget about the possibility of an animal being healthy or not healthy. And we may go back to a blanket standard that says an animal that's born, you wait 8 days. Premature, not premature, we don't know, but we wait 8 days to see if the animal's healthy. That could be where we're up to now, except let's read the Gemara further. If I confuse you, I'm sorry. Bottom line, we've concluded that there's a machlokes, Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel about if you have to wait 8 days, and at this point, the halacha is we follow Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Amar Abaye comments to clarify our Gemara. And this makes exactly, I believe, the case that the professor made. Nafal min hagag, what happens if a baby, God forbid, who is premature, or maybe an animal that this happened to, although here we're clearly talking about a human being. Nafal min hagag, and Rabbi Steinsaltz points out 30 days. The baby, God forbid, fell off a roof. An accident that's entirely not connected to the baby's condition. The baby is a viable, healthy baby. Some other tragedy occurs. Divrei hakol chayu. It is clear that this baby is halachically considered alive. Ki miligi, where is there any debate? Shapiek v'meis. The baby just, pardon me for using this language, up and died. Which I don't know if that's part of standard English, but if the baby just passed, breathe and then stopped to breathe. Mars over chayu, Mars over mesu. Then the Chachamim would say this baby, in analog to the animal which we gave 7 days, it was viable and then it passed. Umar Sover, Shimon Gamliel says no. It was never really alive until it passes the 7, 8 days or 30 days for a human being. Now you're wondering, what is the big halachic distinction? What is the big halachic relevance if a baby died because of what we might call natural death or the vulnerability, out of vulnerability, or if the baby passed as a result of a tragic accident? Is there a halachic difference? And of course, there is a big halachic difference. So let's see the Gemara first. L'may nafka mina. Is there any halachic relevance if the baby is considered alive or not? Lifter min hayibum. The question is a question of yibum. You see, when you learn the Gemara, it's a challenge that's also a joy, which is that the Gemara seamlessly flows from subject to subject, and you have to have a certain degree of well-rounded Jewish knowledge to just hold on and move from issue to issue. So we're talking about bris on Shabbos, which led us to talking about the viability of a baby, initially for the purposes of bris. And then we brought a whole analog to karbanos, to offerings and shechita of animals. But now we brought it back to what's relevant to know if a baby died naturally, if the baby was always vulnerable. Well, there's an issue of yibum. What is yibum? Someone here want to give us a translation or a description of yibum?
Yeah, the obligation for the brother to marry her, etc., etc.
Oh, so if God forbid a couple gets married and then the man passes childless, that woman is not entirely free to remarry. There are steps that happen first. Ideally, from biblical law, this woman will marry the sibling of her deceased husband in a ritual or a procedure called yibum, which we translate, although I don't think it has a lot of meaning in English, as the Levirate marriage, wherein this couple actually does not have to go through full marriage protocols. There is an automatic, here, doctor, you're muted if you're Dr. Hammer. There is an automatic.
Good for the guys in the shoe business.
Right, exactly.
Well, let's hold off on the shoes. This widow can go and immediately begin married life with, again, in biblical law, with one of the brothers, and they are now married. And then the first child that is born would take on the name of the brother, possibly inherit the deceased estate. There is a spiritual connotation. And in the Torah law, this is the ideal, that the brother should marry the other brother. In the event, and this is what Rebero was getting at, in the event that the sibling, or the woman, I should say, doesn't want to marry her deceased husband's brother, so then there is a chalitza ceremony where through a ritual their ties are severed, and now the woman can go on and marry whoever she wants. And in biblical law, it's a negative. It's not ideal. We wanted to rebuild the family of the deceased brother. We'll have opportunity to talk about that. But here is where it gets very complicated and tragically so. What happens if you marry, or if a woman marries an adult man well, hopefully it's an adult man, and he passes, and the only living sibling, I'm sorry. I'm going to continue saying what I'm saying, but that's not actually what the Gemara is getting. The only living sibling is a child. So then the woman has to wait. But that's not what I was getting. I'm sorry. So then the woman has to wait until the child gets older, and that happens sometimes. So you have scenarios where the boy has to be 9, I think. And so you have scenarios where a widow has to wait for her brother-in-law, who is a child, to become halachically an adult or capable of engaging in chalitza, and only then she can be released. And that is a painful and tragic occurrence. How can a woman be absolved or not bound by the yibum and chalitza situation if she has a viable child? If she has a viable child and the child survives, so then she is off the hook. She can get remarried. It gets complicated if the husband passes and she's pregnant, and then a baby is born. So she should be off the hook, but that's only if the baby is actually a living baby. Remember, we said in halacha that if a baby dies early on in the baby's life, so it's considered to have never really lived, it's considered an ephel. And so tragically, a woman could go through pregnancy, have a baby, and the baby dies within 30 days. It's as if she never had a viable baby, and she has to go through the yibum ritual. But what happens if a baby is born, and the baby is healthy, and a tragic accident happens, taking the life of the baby? That would be the nafkamina. That would be where there's a very big distinction between if the baby dies naturally or from an accident. If the baby dies from an accident, we presume the baby to have been viable. She had a living baby with her husband, and she would be absolved from chalitza or yibum. But if the baby died, pihek v'meis, the baby just stopped to breathe within 30 days, this is considered practically a stillborn, and the woman would have to wait possibly for to do chalitza. So I'm sorry for the long
Rabbi, sorry to interrupt you, but what I have always in the back of my mind is in all these discussions, what we're looking at is what in law would be precedents. These are cases that arrived before the Beis Din, and they had to paskin, and they said, "Here's what we did."
This is not precedent.
Not just to go off sidetracks.
This is not precedent. This is there's a different word. This is not precedent. This is relevance. This is there any halachic? Has the Gemara simply been spinning its wheels on a hypothetical that has no legal practicality, or on rare occasion is there a legal practicality? So the Gemara identified somewhat creatively, because it's not a common event, and please God, these events should not happen. What it could happen, it has happened, and so it's possible. Or I guess Roberto, that's where you're saying there is a precedent. Right. But it's not really about precedent, because it could have never happened and would still be a hypothetical nafkamina, a hypothetical relevance. Excuse me. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. Let's see if he does a better job explaining this complex situation than I did. What practical difference is there if the baby is considered alive or not? The difference is to exempt the child's mother from levirate marriage from you. If a man died with no children and his wife was pregnant and a viable child was born, the woman is exempt from levirate marriage. However, if the child was born dead, the man is considered to have died childless, and now the widow has to do the levirate marriage. So if the baby was born and is viable, she's off the hook. So no, if the baby fell off a roof, so we say the baby was probably viable, the woman is exempt. But if, God forbid, the baby just passed, so then the woman has to go through chalitza.
Sorry, Rabbi. So this opens up a whole new thing. If a baby is born, stillborn, the rules of a b'chor and all kinds of other stuff, that's completely different, or we go by this?
Well, for b'chor, for most purposes, not for many purposes, it's the first issue of the womb, whether the baby lives or not. So for certain matters, like I believe Pidyon Aben and others, it's Peter Rechem. It has to do with literally the first baby to come from the woman's womb. But you're asking an interesting question though. You're asking, surely there are other nafkaminas. You're asking, surely there could have been other scenarios presented besides for Yibum? That's a fair question. I'm curious to see if anybody discusses it. And hold on. Oh, hold on. It's even more than that. So now Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel would say, yeah. So Abaye says, if the baby died from an accident, everyone agrees the baby was viable. Machlokes between Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel and the Chachamim is if the baby just died, if the baby just up and died. Mar Savar, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel says for 30 days, the woman has to do Yibum. The Chachamim would say within 30 days, the woman does not have to do Yibum because the baby is automatically viable. And the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. And again, the Ma'anaf Kamina lifter min Yibum. Now the Gemara is going to challenge this. Nafal min Hagag, v'yachlo ari, divrei hakol chai. Can it really be so that are you really claiming that there is absolute consensus that if a baby passes from an accident within 30 days, or the animal passes from an accident within 8 days, does everybody agree that that animal or person is presumed to be alive? Well, we have a story that indicates otherwise. Rav Papa and Rav Huna iklu lebei breid Rav Idi bar Avin. They went to the home of the son of Idi bar Avin. It's interesting. The Avdulahu igla tilta b'yamama deshiva. The host, the son of Rabbi Idi bar Avin, prepared a igla tilta, a calf that was third born. I believe we mean the third birth, but there may be other translations. B'yamama deshiva on day 7. So this is a baby that was born on day 7. The Amrilei, and they told him, had you waited till sundown, we would have eaten what you served us. But we are unable to eat this animal because it has not fully lived out 7 full days into its 8th day. And maybe it would have not lived. And therefore, what you shechted for us is treif, unkosher. And so Abaye says, not Abaye. The Gemara says, hold on, we see here, Rav Papa and Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua are of the opinion that an animal that doesn't live out 7 full days and into the 8th day, and a baby who doesn't live 30 days, it's not really considered alive. Rashi, Isrechisu, Milishachlai, Ad Orta, had you waited till night, Shulel Shmini, Havachlina Mene, we would eat it, even though it didn't live a full 8 days. The Mixas Hayam Kekuloi, in Jewish law, sometimes a part of a day is considered a full day, and this is relevance, let's say, for bris. It has relevance for Shiva Lo Yaleinu, right? That we don't actually end up sitting 7 full days, end up sitting only a piece of a 7th day. For 7 days.
What is the significance of a third born calf?
I believe the significance was that it was presumed to be a high quality, high grade. Probably they imagined that the mother was in ideal health and had the ideal nutrition, or not nutrition, the ideal health at the third, I believe so, at the third birth. Because usually they begin.
We need Alan for this stuff.
That was probably as a result of what you said. I'm thinking maybe the fact that it was the third already, it was a proven concept that anybody born of that mother would have a tendency to live, rather than a firstborn that you don't know sometimes if it would live or not. So there was already a chazaka that any newborn of that mother had a tendency to live. So that's why the fact that he did it on the seventh day instead of the eighth day, since there was a chazakah, maybe that's why he felt that he could slaughter it on the seventh day rather than the eighth day.
Interesting. So you're saying that there was a halachic reason behind it. That's very interesting. I hadn't considered that.
Maybe they wanted to stress that it wasn't the firstborn Bechor that should belong to the Kohen.
So I'll tell you what, I would be inclined, Professor, if I didn't know what I knew, I would think I would probably think that what you're saying is the fact. Happens to be that commonly, the Talmud commonly uses the language igla tilta, a third, the calf that's third, to describe high grade beef, high quality. Now, the commentaries actually are very perturbed by this story, because Egla Tilta has multiple possible translations, not always like what we're saying here. In our Gemara, we're kind of compelled to say, there's a reason why I translated it as a third born animal, because every other translation would challenge the presumption of shechting it on the seventh day. Some commentaries say Egla Tilta means that it's a third of its life, or a third into its childhood, or it's a premature, which doesn't really make sense, or other explanations. But in this context, we have to assume that it's viable. Actually, give me a second, because I don't have access to the commentaries to discuss it, the primary sources on Safaria. But let me see if we have any more information about this here. We should. Give me a second.
If it was a question of a bechor, they could have said the second born. Didn't have
Yeah,
to
no,
the third born.
it's a very wise explanation, but you're right. Then it could be second. So what's the third?
Rabbi, what about he invites these people, he serves them, and they start to ask him a shaila whether he did right or not. A little bit of their
basically, kosher is not suspended just because you don't want to offend your host. And maybe this Gemara and many other Gemaras is proof. It's also possible this is part of a rabbinic banter of sorts, where they're disagreeing about the halachic principle. So it's possible, I'm just saying it's possible that the host was making a point and they were making a counterpoint. He was saying, you see, this is such, and maybe this is actually, I'm sorry, I kind of rejected, I think Dr. Stamler, it is possible or probable, or maybe I think this is what I first said, that a baby, that the mother that gives birth to its third child, there's a track record of healthy babies. The mother is in its prime, and so we are most confident at the health and vitality of the baby. And so maybe then, even though it's not 8 days, isn't 8 days only if you're afraid the baby's going to survive? And so he was probably making a halachic point, and the hosts disagreed. It happens to be that there is there's a Tosfos, there's a Gemara in Gittin. Let me see if I can open up. I want to see the Gemara. Give me a second. All right. One of the most famous stories of the Talmud is the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Everyone knows it. It's in the chapter of Hanizakin, the chapter in Masechet Gittin that talks all about the Churban Beis Hamikdash. And after the guy was insulted, what did he do? He told the king that the Jews are rebelling. And so he told them how to test it. He sent, here, I want to just show you the Gemara inside. Ozal, I know a lot of texts here are open, but let's take a look real fast. Ozal Shadar Bidei Igla Tilta, the Jew, Bar Kamsa, was dispatched with an Igla Tilta. With a Igla Tilta, whatever it is. Bahadi de Kaasi, Shadabe Muma, the Jew Bar Kamsa injured the animal on its lips or on its eyes in a place where the Gentiles wouldn't consider it to be injured and the Jews do. It was rejected, and the rest is history. What is Igla tilta.
Yeah, they say a 3-year-old here.
So here, the Gemara, Rabbi Steinsaltz translates a 3-year-old calf. Tosfos, hold on, let me just close this out. Tosfos on Gittin says, what is Igla tilta? So here, Egla, K'may v'shalishim al kulo. What is shalishim al kulo? We're describing the chosen warriors of Paro. High grades, robust. Ukimai, Egla, Mishuleshes, Vayal Mishulash. In the Brisbane Absarim, Abraham takes an Egla Mishuleshes. What's an Egla Mishuleshes? Did you ever wonder? If you learn Chumash, what is the Egla Mishuleshes? Hold on, where's the English? Let's see the English. Here we translate 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old sheep. So it's 3 years old. Let's see the commentaries here. Rashi says, Shloisha Agalim. So Rashi translates it differently. He says there's 3. Ibn Ezra says, Yesh Oimrim Gimel Izim Vayasher Beinai Bas Shalosh Shanim. Ibn Ezra was very into diktuk, right? Says it's actually a 3-year-old animal. The Ramban quotes the Machlokes. Rabbi Avram, the Ibn Ezra says Bas Shalosh. Uncle says Shalosh, it was 3. And the Ramban paskins like Rashi and the Ibn Ezra. Ki Bas Shalosh Lo Tikare Egla. If it's 3 years old, it's not an Egla. An Egla is a baby. 3 years old, and it's an adult. So what you're seeing by now is that there is a massive Torah-wide challenge, a struggle to understand what this Egla Mishuleshes, or in our Gemara, Igla Tilta, a 3 Egla. Is it 3 of them in our Gemara? It's obviously not 3 of them. Is it 3 years old? Well, maybe it would fall into this Machlokes. Let's see just a few more commentaries just to show what a big discussion this is.
3-year-old in our whole story is not necessary.
Well, in our Gemara, it can't work. You can't have a 7-day-old 3-year-old, right? But I'm just trying to show you here what Tosfos is alluding to, which is this is a big, big question, a big issue. So let's go back to our Tosfos. Here. Let's go back to Tosfos. So the Gemara quote, the Gemara in Gittin. Sorry, Dr. Hammer, go ahead.
Just a quick.
We're
question.
over time.
Is there any place where the idea of multiple births, twins or triplets, are mentioned?
That's interesting. I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I think we can be fairly certain that's not what's happening here, but that's a good question. Might this sound like a triplet?
Right.
A tri. Yeah, right. Very interesting. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to hurry up over here. We're over time. If anyone has to go, I'm sorry. I don't mean to hold you. This is more of an agadic discussion. There's a story about a 7-year-old calf that's also somehow an Igla Tilta. So the commentaries say, you want to know what it is? It is, look in the Gemara in Gittin, where we also have Igla Tilta. And here Tosfos says, well, it means it's robust. So it's a 3rd translation. What does it mean? Egla Mishuleshes, Pirish Bari V'toiv. A very solid animal. That makes the most sense in our context too, right? 7-year-old baby, but it's really vibrant. Yesh Mefarshim, Shlish Libeten. Others say that it was a 3rd born, which was the original first translation that came to my mind based on, I guess, what I remembered from this Gemara. V'lo Yitachim. Tosfos says that can't be the story over here. The Amrina bePerak Arba Misais Dav Mara Igla Tilta. Based on the context of that Gemara, it can't be that it's a 3rd born. Shemefarish Gadol Shlish. There it says that it's a 3rd into its life. It's already grown a 3rd. Now, beside Perak Velazar Demil in our Gemara, it says Avelu Igla Tilta V'Yamad Shiva Pirish Yom Shvila Leidasai. So Tosfos ends off saying basically that the translation seems like it's all over the place. On one hand, it should mean that it's a 3rd in growth, but that can't work in our Gemara. On the other hand, it maybe means very robust. That would make sense in our Gemara. It could also mean that it was a third born, which maybe is synonymous with a kind of very vibrant, strong creature. Anyways, so I think you get the point. This is a big, wild, dynamic conversation. In our Gemara, we're compelled to say that we're talking about a healthy, vibrant animal. Maybe it's the third to be born. And we'll continue this discussion tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem. Dearest friends.
Rabbi, after you stop the recording, I just want to tell the professor something, please.
Okay. Thank you for joining us today. With Hashem's help, we'll continue to study tomorrow. I want to welcome everyone back. Wish everyone a healthy year in the Hasidic tradition. We say V'Yakov halach lidarko. Holiday season is an intense, especially this year, more intense than ever, because when Shabbas Yontif, an intense time, tiring, draining, uplifting. And now is where we have to, certainly if you're a rabbi, you have to hit a different routine. But if you're a Jew that observes Yontif and doesn't go to work or doesn't do the regular things, it's a change. We get back to normal, which is a big opportunity. People that are professionals, you don't have to start blocking off your calendar every other day. And it's a good opportunity to take all the inspiration of Simchas Torah and the Torah into our life. My dear friends, I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the recording so Rebbeinu could make his comment. But again, I want to thank you all for being here. Looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. Gesundheit and Freilich.